Luffy's impact in One Piece is immense, but you already knew that. Have you ever stopped and thought, what would be the impact in the One Piece verse if Luffy was never born? You probably haven't. Well, I took the pleasure of sitting down, having a think, and basically doing this for you. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as I take you through the importance of Luffy's life. And to begin with, we have to go to Fuchsia Village, because if Luffy is never born, Shanks never meets him. And if Shanks never meets Luffy, I'm pretty much sure he would have met Ace, and therefore Ace would have become the one that Shanks gave his arm for. And I'm actually talking figuratively here, because if Luffy was never born, Shanks doesn't lose his arm. He instead tries to give the Straw Hat to Ace, but Ace, of course, as we know, has no intention of becoming the Pirate King, as he hates his father. However, I do think Ace actually does eat the Gomu Gomu no Mi, but this is just purely headcanon. But let's just imagine he does. I don't think much else changes in his story, and I believe his journey continues as per the current story. But let's move on, because without Luffy being alive, he never meets Kobe, and so Kobe never becomes a Marine, and he remains a cabin boy on Alvida's ship. And damn, that really does suck, because Kobe seems like he has future admiral potential in the story. Oh, and I forgot, he has no impact at that Rocky Port incident, but let's save that for later, because if I'm not mistaken, Luffy meets Zoro next. And what a shame, because with no Luffy, Zoro is never freed from that pole in Shell's Town, and he remains a captive of the Marines and pretty much gets executed. Oh, and I've just remembered again, this is where we met Axe-Hand Morgan and Helmeppo, so I'm going to make the assumption that Helmeppo never becomes a Marine either, and he never meets up with Kobe to train with Garp. And wow, this is actually kind of insane now that I think about it. But let's move on again, and I know I should really cover off Nami right now, because she's part of Luffy's journey at this point. But in terms of the story, I think it's only right that we go to Syrup Village, where we met Usopp. But this is where I think things get really sad, as Usopp, who was known as the town's liar, would have had no chance against Captain Kuro, who, fun fact, actually had the second highest IQ in the East Blue behind Ben Beckman. But given that Kuro was so intelligent and Usopp was a known liar, I believe that without Luffy being born, Kuro's plan succeeds and he inherits all of Kaya's wealth. And Kuro probably murders quite a few of the villagers alongside Kaya too. Now the only question I have is whether Usopp survives. And I'll probably say yes, because he's a coward. He'd probably just run away, but I wouldn't disagree with any of you all if you think that he'd die trying to protect Kaya. So I guess that one's kind of up for debate. But just like DJ Khaled told Little Baby, let's keep going, because Baratie is up next. And that's where we get Don Krieg and his attack on the Baratie. And whilst he probably hurts quite a few people, I don't actually think he'd be successful. I think Sanji and Zeph have the skill set to hold Don Krieg off for a while, until, you know, they're fortunately saved by Mihawk, who we know of course turns up and is hunting him down. And while some of you may say that Sanji isn't strong enough, I'm definitely going to be biased right now, because I'm a huge Sanji fan. But honestly, I do think Blackleg Sanji could temporarily hold off Don Krieg at that point. But now to Nami, because this is another emotional one. I just think about everything that Arlong put Nami through, and unfortunately, without Luffy being born, things wouldn't change. Nami would continue to be a slave for Arlong and continue to have no hope as she continues to be Nami the cat burglar, hoping that one day she could buy her town's freeness. But unfortunately, that would never happen. And so, yeah, it's quite emotional for Nami actually. But now we've covered off the East Blue 5, I think it's time we move on. And One Piece has been going on so long, I've actually had to just go back and read what other things would have happened if Luffy was never born. And so I hope you guys and girls appreciate this actually. And basically, if Luffy was never born, then you guys and girls would never have subscribed to my YouTube channel. So this is the time I'm going to point it out to you, that since you probably haven't subscribed, then this would be a perfect time to like the video and subscribe to the channel. But let's move on, because unfortunately, without Luffy alive, Laboon never gets the opportunity to meet the Straw Hats, and he continues to pound his head on Reverse Mountain as he continues the 50 years of waiting for Brook and the Rumba Pirates to return. And since we're talking about Laboon, we have to talk about Brook, who unfortunately would never get the chance to meet Luffy either, and would continuously being lonely and suffer for all of eternity, which is actually really sad. But what about Chopper? Because we were introduced to him in Drum Island with the sexy Dr. Correa. Okay, I'm playing. She's like 140 years old. But more seriously, if Luffy was never born and never meets Nami, the crew don't end up with a sick Nami with Luffy looking for a doctor, and Wapol probably does take over the Drum Kingdom with the people becoming his slaves. And we never get Luffy's Gomu Gomu Bazooka and Wapol's defeat. But now things get even more dark, because what happens with our honorary Straw Hat, Vivi? And honestly, with no Luffy plot armor, Sir Crocodile is definitely taking over the Alabasta Kingdom, and Vivi and Cobra are all probably killed. Well, that depends if you think Vivi is an ancient weapon or not, but ultimately Crocodile is successful. And since we're talking about Alabasta, we have to talk about Robin too, and remind ourselves that if there's no Luffy, then Robin doesn't leave the Alabasta Kingdom and stays by Crocodile's side. She probably does still continue to try and find more about the poneglyphs, and having Crocodile by her side would probably be her best bet actually. But how about Skypiea? Because this is where we met Enel, and I was going to say I don't think too much will change, but unfortunately I'm actually wrong. With Enel's unique mantra ability, which we now know as Haki, and with his absolutely overpowered devil fruit, I think he continues to rule over everyone and probably never actually goes to the moon. And next up on my list is actually Frankie, and I believe he's probably the only one that isn't majorly affected by this. He probably just still continues to live in Water 7 with the Frankie family, and if the government ever came for the Pluton blueprints, he probably still destroys them. But next, I'd probably say I want to go with Gecko Moria in Thriller Bark, who I believe continues to do his thing, stealing shadows, but the little things that I think are affected are like the awakening of Ryuma's shadow, and since Zoro's dead, he never actually gets Shusui, and therefore Shusui is never actually returned to Ryuma's grave in Wano. So yeah, that's kind of like a minor thing really. But onto Mocktown and the introduction of Blackbeard, because post Mocktown, Ace and Blackbeard had their battle on Banara Island, and at this point Ace was defeated and handed to the world government. So would this really happen again, given that Ace now had the Gomu Gomu no Mi at this point? And my answer to that is probably yes. I think Ace is probably captured, but whether he actually dies, I think is up in the air, because one, with him eating a Gomu Gomu no Mi, does Shanks ally with Whitebeard to save him? And two, if he does quote unquote die, given that his fruit is actually the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika, does he awaken this and end up using that ridiculous power where he's only limited by his mind? I mean, I'm gonna leave that up to you guys and girls, so you let me know down in the comments what you think. But onto Fishman Island, because what about Hody Jones? Would he be able to overthrow King Neptune? Quite possibly, but in the long run, I believe Jinbei would be able to defeat him, but that would probably still leave Fishman Island under Big Mom's control. And next, we have Dressrosa, and I've just realized that without Luffy being born, things kind of become awkward, because I haven't spoken about Sabo yet, and I'm probably going to assume he's still in the Revolutionaries, and the only reason that he would come to Dressrosa is if it was for Ace's fruit, but I made the assumption that Ace survived, so that wouldn't be the case. So in regards to Dressrosa, I think Rebecca has a terrible fate actually, as she would never be freed from the battles in the Colosseum and probably eventually die at some point, probably dying in battle. And in regard to the likes of like Viola, who we all know had Sanji as a savior, I think she has quite an unfortunate fate too, as there's no one there to help her at all, and she continues to suffer under Dofi. And now we have Law, who we all know that Dofi would want to keep alive due to wanting him to perform the immortality operation, but that is not something that I think Law would do so willingly. So I think what would happen is that Law would end up dying, and if Dofi is as clued up as we think, he probably is able to give Law's power, or Law's fruit should I say, to somebody else, and they would probably be the one to perform the surgery on him. But in the meantime, given that Luffy is never born, Frankie never makes it to Dressrosa, Dofi probably continues supplying Kaido with weapons, and Caesar probably continues to send the smiles to Kaido in Wano. And given we're speaking about Wano and everything that's probably recently happened, it's a bit sad to mention, but the Scabbards would definitely have been killed, and this includes the death of Momonosuke. And now that I even think about it, all the people of Zou probably would have been killed by Jack too, as Dofi is never caught, and so Jack never has to leave and go and rescue Dofi. And lastly, what about Yamato? Because she had been waiting to leave the island, but she'd still be on Wano and never be freed, which is actually really unfortunate. And Kaido would continue to remain supreme on Wano. But honestly, that just about does it for now. We're currently on Egghead, and of course, there are going to be some huge things that happen due to Luffy being Luffy. But who knows, maybe in the future I could do a part 2 of this and explain what would happen and what would be affected if Luffy was never born. But that just about does it from me. If you like anything I've had to say, then please make sure you leave a like on the video, and make sure you subscribe to the channel if you would like to see more content just like this. Oh, and also let me know down in the comments if I forgot to mention anything major that Luffy being alive has had a major influence in. Say